My name is Maya. I'm 22 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the invisible echo in my family's grand symphony. Last month, my father, Mr. Sterling, delivered an ultimatum that shattered my carefully constructed world. Attend my perfect sister Stella's wedding, or lose my college tuition completely. What my family doesn't know is that while they believe I'm barely scraping by, I'm actually graduating at the top of my class. I've kept my success a fiercely guarded secret for years, but I'm finally ready to unmask the real me. If you've ever felt like an afterthought in your own story, drop a comment below and hit subscribe to follow my journey of finally standing in my truth. Growing up as the younger sister of Stella Sterling was like living in permanent twilight. From the moment she entered the world, Stella, now 28, was the dazzling supernova, the gold standard against which I was relentlessly measured and always found wanting. She was everything my parents valued: graceful, effortlessly charismatic, conventionally beautiful, and seemingly born with a silver spoon in every achievement. I remember being 10 years old, pouring weeks of my life into a robotics project that simulated a Mars rover. It won first place at the regional competition, an achievement that should have made any parent swell with pride. The awards ceremony was set for 7:00 p.m., and I'd reminded my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, repeatedly. "We'll try our best, Maya," my mother had said that morning, a familiar hesitation in her voice I'd come to dread. That evening, I stood alone on the stage, clutching my blue ribbon, scanning the sea of faces for theirs, only to find empty seats where they should have been. Later, I learned they had attended Stella's impromptu figure skating recital instead. "Stella needed us there," my father explained, his voice devoid of apology as I stood before them, tears blurring my vision. This was her big solo performance. But there weren't other ceremonies for me, because after a while I stopped telling them about my achievements altogether. High school brought a new layer of challenges. Reading assignments felt like deciphering ancient hieroglyphs, and numbers would dance wildly on the page whenever I attempted math problems. It wasn't until junior year that a particularly perceptive teacher, Ms. Anya Sharma, suggested I might have a learning difference. The diagnosis of dyslexia finally explained my struggles, but my parents, they saw it as confirmation of what they already believed, that I simply wasn't as naturally brilliant as Stella. "Not everyone can be a superstar, Maya," my father declared after a particularly difficult parent-teacher conference. "Some people just have to work harder." His words cut deeper than he knew, slicing into my already fragile self-worth. My mother, Mrs. Sterling, would occasionally show fleeting flashes of guilt about the glaring disparity in how they treated us, but these brief moments of awareness never solidified into actual change. She remained a passive enabler of my father's blatant favoritism. "Your father just wants what's best for both of you," she'd say, her voice soft but unyielding whenever I dared to voice my complaints about the unfairness. Different support, it seemed, meant different levels of attention, praise, and financial backing. When Stella graduated college with honors in digital marketing, my parents threw an extravagant party at our home. I was in my senior year of high school then, wrestling with daunting college applications and my newly diagnosed learning disability. My father boomed during his toast, champagne glass raised high. The room erupted in laughter, and I forced a weak smile, playing along with the family narrative that I was the underachiever, the quiet disappointment. That night, after the guests had departed and the house had settled into an eerie quiet, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. My father asked, his voice thick with resignation. "Richard, that's not fair," my mother replied, but her protest was a mere whisper, half-hearted at best. "I'm just being realistic, Eleanor," he countered. "The girl has limited potential." I stood frozen in the hallway, their words washing over me like ice water, chilling me to the bone. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I decided that if they had already determined my worth, I would no longer seek their approval. Instead, I would work twice as hard, push twice as far, but I would do it in secret. I would let them believe what they wanted while building a reality they couldn't even begin to imagine. The only person who ever saw beyond the family narrative was my Aunt Clara, my mother's elder sister. Unlike my parents, Aunt Clara actually asked me genuine questions about my interests and truly listened to my answers. "You know, Maya," she told me once, as I helped her prune roses during a family gathering while everyone else inside fawned over Stella's latest social media endorsement. "I see something in you that reminds me of myself at your age, this quiet determination." Her words were like a cool drink in a scorching desert, and I found myself blinking back tears as I dug my fingers into the rich soil. "Your parents might not see it yet," she continued, her voice soft but firm, "but you're going to surprise everyone someday." And so, I developed my coping mechanism. I would appear average, even unassuming, to avoid their inevitable disappointment, while excelling fiercely in private. I learned to deflect questions about my grades with vague responses. I stopped bringing friends home to avoid the inevitable comparisons to Stella. I became an expert at being overlooked, which paradoxically gave me the profound freedom to pursue excellence entirely on my own terms. By the time I started Northwood University, the pattern was firmly established. My parents had minimal expectations for me, which translated into minimal interest in my college experience. They paid my tuition because it was the right thing to do, as my father put it, but beyond that financial obligation, their focus remained laser-sharp on Stella's dazzling career trajectory as a global influencer, her picture-perfect relationship with her fiancé Reese, and the life milestones she was hitting right on schedule. And all the while, I was building a different story for myself, one they knew absolutely nothing about. The call from my father came on a Tuesday afternoon as I was walking back from my advanced AI ethics seminar. The screen lit up with Dad, and I briefly considered letting it go to voicemail, but habit and a lingering, foolish desire for approval made me answer. "Maya," he began without preamble, his voice all business. "Stella's wedding date is set for May 15th. I was momentarily stunned that he had actually looked up my school schedule, before realizing it was only to ensure I had no excuse not to attend. "I need you to confirm you'll be there," he continued, his tone brooking no argument. "Dad, I hesitated, thinking about the critical research presentation I had scheduled that Thursday, not to mention my own graduation ceremony. They didn't even know about that. He cut me off before I could finish. "Maya, this is non-negotiable." His voice hardened in the way that had always made me shrink as a child. "Let me be clear. If you choose not to attend your sister's wedding, I will consider it a personal insult to this family, and I will stop paying your tuition immediately." My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "You'd really do that?" "In a heartbeat," he replied without hesitation, his voice cold as ice. "Family comes first, Maya. It's time you learned that. This isn't like one of your little coding projects you can just skip out on." And the casual dismissal of my academic commitments as little coding projects sent a wave of searing nausea through me. My hands began to shake uncontrollably, and I felt sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool spring air. I have to go to class," I managed to say, my voice barely audible. "Just be there, Maya." He hung up without waiting for my response. I stumbled to a nearby bench and collapsed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. My breathing came in short, sharp gasps as hot tears burned behind my eyes. The familiar, soul-crushing feeling of being insignificant, of having my needs dismissed, washed over me like an old, painful friend. My mind flashed back to Stella's engagement party 6 months earlier. I had driven 4 hours from campus on a weekend when I should have been completing a crucial AI research assignment. I arrived at the upscale restaurant my parents had rented out for the occasion, wearing the nicest dress I owned, which still paled in comparison to everyone else's attire. For 3 hours, I stood awkwardly at the periphery of conversations, nursing the same glass of sparkling water, watching my parents orbit around Stella and Reese like proud, glittering satellites. When it came time for family photos, my mother had to call my name twice because the photographer had started arranging the group without me. The most telling moment came when Reese, my soon-to-be brother-in-law, approached me at the bar. He asked politely. I stared at him in disbelief. I'm Maya. Recognition dawned slowly on his face. Oh, right. Of course. Sorry about that. We had actually met 6 times over the 2 years he and Stella had been dating. My own sister's fiancé couldn't recognize me. That said everything about how often I came up in their conversations, how little I factored into their lives. Back in my dorm room that evening, after my father's chilling call, I paced the small space between my desk and bed while my roommate, Chloe, watched with genuine concern. "He can't actually cut off your tuition," she insisted, her voice full of disbelief. "You don't know my dad," I replied, biting at my thumbnail, a nervous habit I thought I'd outgrown. "He absolutely would. But what about your presentation and graduation?" I shook my head, my throat tight. "You heard him. 3 days of bridesmaid duties before the wedding." Chloe sat cross-legged on her bed, her neuroscience textbook forgotten beside her. That was the question, wasn't it? I had worked so incredibly hard to become financially independent after graduation. My job offer from Quantum Innovations was contingent on my degree completion, which was set to happen the week after Stella's wedding. If I lost my tuition funding now, I'd be unable to complete my degree, which meant losing the job, the apartment I'd already put a deposit on, everything. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Please don't fight your father on this, Maya. We need family harmony right now. Stella is under so much stress with the wedding planning. Just come and be supportive." All they were asking was for me to continue playing the role they had assigned me, the lesser daughter, the afterthought, the one whose time and commitments meant nothing compared to Stella's glittering demands. "I'll go," I finally told Chloe, my voice hollow, defeated. But as I spoke the words, I walked to my desk drawer and pulled out a worn folder, hidden beneath my textbooks. Inside were the awards, the Dean's List certificates, the letter confirming my selection as valedictorian, and the job offer that would finally set me free. "I'll go," I repeated with more resolution this time. My secret academic journey began during my sophomore year of college. The subtext was clear. A non-technical field was an acceptable career path for someone with my supposedly limited abilities. But during that first year, I took an introductory artificial intelligence course as an elective and discovered I had not only an astonishing aptitude for complex algorithms, but a genuine burning passion for it. The structured nature of programming languages bypassed many of the challenges my dyslexia presented with traditional reading, and the problem-solving aspects engaged my mind in ways no other subject had before. Professor Aris Thorne, a leading figure in the AI department, noticed my work and asked me to stay after class one day. "Maya, your project solution was elegant," he said, gesturing to my code on his computer screen. "You approached the problem differently than I've seen before." When I explained my situation, including my dyslexia and my parents' low expectations, he didn't dismiss my concerns, but he didn't accept them as immutable either. "Learning differences often correlate with unique thinking patterns that can be tremendously valuable in this field," he said, his gaze steady and encouraging. That conversation changed the trajectory of my entire life. I switched my major the very next day, but told no one in my family. When they asked about my classes during our infrequent phone calls, I spoke vaguely about humanities seminars and student development. Meanwhile, I was diving deep into advanced AI architectures, neural networks, and robotic control systems. To make it work financially, I took a night shift job at the campus IT help desk 4 nights a week, from 10:00 p.m. to 2:00 a.m. I monitored servers and answered late-night tech queries while using slow periods to complete my coursework. The schedule was punishing. There were mornings I found myself silently crying from sheer exhaustion in the shower, only to pull myself together and head to my 8:00 a.m. AI lecture. But the results spoke for themselves. 0 GPA that I couldn't share with anyone except my academic advisor and Professor Thorne, who had become my unwavering mentor. During the spring semester of my junior year, I was alone in a bathroom stall, silently sobbing after seeing the newest Dean's List posted with my name at the very top, when I heard someone enter. "Hello?" a concerned voice called out. I tried to quiet my sniffling, but the person persisted. "Look, I don't want to be weird, but are you okay?" Something in her tone, a genuine warmth made me unlock the stall door. Standing there was Lena, a brilliant girl from my advanced AI programming class. I had admired her contributions in class discussions, but had never spoken to her directly. "Sorry," I said, wiping my eyes, my voice thick. "This is—" she repeated, her eyes kind. "Yes, no." I gestured helplessly toward the dean's list, visible through the bathroom door. "I made top of the list again, but I can't tell anyone." Instead of looking confused or judging me, Lena nodded slowly, a knowing look in her eyes. "Family stuff is complicated. Want to get coffee and talk about it?" That was the beginning of my first real friendship in college. Lena became my confidant, the one person who knew both versions of me, the struggling student my family believed in, and the academic star I actually was. In my senior year, Professor Thorne invited me to join his cutting-edge research team, working on an autonomous AI system for optimizing disaster response and humanitarian aid distribution. The project combined immense technical challenges with profound real-world impact, and I threw myself into it completely. "This distribution model you've designed, Maya," Professor Thorne said after reviewing my contribution, his eyes wide with admiration. "It's revolutionary." I panicked at first. My name would be on it. My parents might find out. He gave me a long, piercing look. I decided to take the risk. Our paper was accepted, and though my parents never discovered it, the publication caught the attention of several leading tech companies. By early spring of my senior year, I had 5 job offers, including the dream position at Quantum Innovations that I eventually accepted. Around the same time, I received an email from the dean of the robotics engineering department that nearly stopped my heart. "Congratulations, Maya Sterling." I stared at the email for so long the screen went dark. Valedictorian, the highest academic honor, and no one who supposedly loved me had any idea. That same week, I received my acceptance to Viridian Institute for Advanced Robotics' graduate program with a full scholarship. It was everything I had worked for, the culmination of years of secret striving, and I had no one to share it with except Lena and Professor Thorne. I had managed to reduce my dependency on my parents' money through scholarships, my IT job, and a paid research position, but I still relied on their tuition payments to cover the gap. This necessity had kept me tethered to their expectations and their suffocating narrative about who I was. Last Christmas, I had nearly broken my silence, sitting around the dinner table, watching my parents lavish praise on Stella for her new influencer brand deal, barely acknowledging my presence. "Actually, I've been working on something pretty exciting too," I began, my voice a tentative whisper. "That's nice, dear," my mother said absently, before immediately turning back to Stella. "Now tell us more about the wedding venue options." The moment passed, and with it, my courage. I retreated back into invisibility. But something had fundamentally shifted inside me. I was tired of being unseen, unheard, and underestimated. I just needed the right moment to reveal the truth. 2 weeks before Stella's wedding, my phone buzzed with a series of rapid-fire texts that made my stomach sink. "Maya, your bridesmaid dress needs final alterations by Saturday," Stella wrote. "Mom says you haven't scheduled your fitting yet." Before I could respond, another message appeared. "Also need your shoe size for the matching custom heels. $250. Venmo me ASAP." And then, "Hair and makeup call time is 5:30 a.m. sharp on wedding day. Extra charge if you're late." I stared at my phone, overwhelmed by the relentless financial demands. The bridesmaid dress had already cost me $950, money I had been meticulously saving for my post-graduation move. The additional expenses Stella kept adding were stretching my budget to the breaking point, but I knew better than to complain. The dress fitting the following Saturday was an exercise in pure humiliation. Stella had chosen identical dusty rose gowns for her 7 bridesmaids, all of whom were her social media entourage and close friends, except for me. The style, with its low back and fitted silhouette, had been selected without any consideration for my comfort or body type. We might need to take it in more at the bust," Stella remarked, circling me like a hawk as I stood on the pedestal, surrounded by mirrors. One of her friends, Tiffany, giggled behind her hand. "And maybe we can add some padding for balance," Stella continued, her voice dripping with insensitivity, evaluating me like a failed runway model. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood, reminding myself that I only needed to get through this for my future. Later that afternoon, Stella pulled me aside to review the wedding schedule she had created. "So, I've made some adjustments to the family photo arrangements," she said, showing me a detailed spreadsheet on her tablet. My voice was barely a whisper, laced with disbelief. Stella had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, though it quickly vanished. "I know, but Tiffany and Brittany are the same height, and they'll balance the front row better with Mom and Dad. It's an aesthetic thing, Maya." But it was personal. Everything about this wedding was designed to highlight Stella's perfect, curated life and relegate me to the shadows, just as our family dynamic had always done. The tension escalated further at the family dinner the night before the rehearsal. My parents had rented a lavish private dining room at an exclusive downtown restaurant, and the conversation revolved entirely around wedding details and Stella's recent lucrative brand deals. "Oh, before I forget," Stella announced as an opulent chocolate lava cake was being served, "we've had to make some changes to the reception program." I looked up from my barely touched cake, my stomach churning. "What?" "I know, and I'm sure it would have been nice," Stella said, her tone suggesting the exact opposite. "But Reese's college roommate, Liam, is flying in from London specifically for the wedding, and he's a professional stand-up comedian. It just makes more sense to give him that slot." My father nodded approvingly. "Good decision, Princess." "Speaking of programs," I said, attempting to change the subject, my voice trembling slightly, "my graduation is the weekend after the wedding." My father laughed dismissively, a harsh sound that echoed in the luxurious room. "Let's focus on one event at a time, Maya." "It's just that it's important to me," my father interrupted, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "That's the main thing." The casual assumption that I might be failing, that I was inherently incapable, cut deep, especially since I was about to graduate as valedictorian. But I swallowed my bitter response and nodded. "I'm passing," I said quietly, the understatement of my academic career. After dinner, my mother pulled me into the ladies' room for a private chat. "Maya, honey," she began, reapplying her perfect red lipstick in the mirror. I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "You know, making things about you, bringing up sensitive subjects." She turned to face me, her eyes pleading but firm. "This is Stella's special time," I asked, unable to keep the raw bitterness from my voice. My mother sighed dramatically. "See that attitude right there? That's what I'm talking about." I wanted to scream that I had legitimate grievances, not issues, but instead, I promised to behave. The conversation left me feeling hollow and invisible, as always. On my way back to the table, I overheard Stella and Reese talking around the corner. "God, I hope Maya doesn't embarrass me during the wedding," Stella was saying, her voice a low, exasperated whisper. "Did you see what she's wearing tonight? And she still hasn't done anything with her hair," Reese asked, his voice filled with an almost pitying curiosity. Stella laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "Maya's always been the family disappointment. Academic probation last year, from what Mom told me." Their words froze me in place, colder than any ice. Academic probation? I had never been anything less than exceptional in my studies. The insidious lie my parents had apparently told about me, and that Stella so readily believed and shared, was the ultimate crushing dismissal of my worth. But the final straw, the one that splintered my self-control into a million pieces, came the next morning. I accidentally discovered a receipt in my mother's designer purse while looking for car keys. It was from the wedding venue, a direct payment of $75,000 from my parents, as a wedding gift contribution to Stella and Reese. $75,000. Just months earlier, when I'd asked for a small amount of help buying crucial textbooks for my final semester, my father had claimed they were stretched thin and could only spare $150. The disparity was so stark, so blatant, so utterly contemptuous that something inside me simply broke. I retreated to my old bedroom in my parents' house, where I was staying for the wedding weekend, and called the one person who had always seen me clearly, Aunt Clara. "I need your advice," I said, my voice barely a whisper, choked with emotion, when she answered. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I drove back to campus, the darkness of the road mirroring the darkness in my soul, and found myself in the quiet, comforting sanctuary of the university library at 2 o'clock in the morning. The building was nearly empty, just a few dedicated students preparing for finals. I sat at my usual desk by the window, overlooking the central quad, and tried to make sense of the volatile emotions churning inside me. For years, I had accepted my family's narrative about who I was. I had meticulously hidden my accomplishments to avoid disrupting their comfortable, convenient perception of me. But at what cost? I had become complicit in my own erasure. Professor Thorne's words from earlier that year echoed in my mind. We had been discussing my future plans, and I had expressed hesitation about taking the prestigious job offer without my family's knowledge. "Maya," he had said, leaning forward across his desk, his gaze penetrating. "In professional settings, you will encounter people who underestimate you, who try to define your worth based on their limited perception." He had fixed me with his unblinking gaze. "Your family may never see you clearly. That's their limitation, not yours." Sitting in the quiet library, bathed in the soft glow of my laptop screen, I realized he was profoundly, undeniably right. I had been shrinking myself, making myself small enough to fit into the suffocating box my family had meticulously built for me. It was time to break out. The next morning, I met with the dean to confirm my attendance at graduation. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I will be giving the valedictorian address." The dean looked concerned but didn't press the issue. With my academic affairs irrevocably in order, I turned to my financial independence. I signed and returned the formal job offer from Quantum Innovations, confirming my start date for the month after graduation. The starting salary they offered would allow me to support myself completely, ending my financial dependence on my parents once and for all. Next, I finalized the lease on a charming, modest apartment near the Quantum campus, putting down the security deposit from my savings. It was a small studio, nothing fancy, but it would be mine. A space where I could finally exist without apology, without judgment. My hands shook as I completed each of these tasks, but with each signature, each confirmation email, I felt more resolved, more powerful. I was building a foundation for myself that couldn't be threatened or taken away. That evening, I meticulously gathered my evidence. I organized my academic awards, printed copies of my transcript showing my perfect GPA, made a copy of my job offer letter, and collected the information about my full scholarship to Viridian. I placed everything in a sleek, professional portfolio, the kind used for important presentations. My friend asked, her brow furrowed with concern when I explained my audacious plan to her and our mutual friend Sam over coffee. "The rift is already there," I replied, my voice steady, tinged with a newfound steel. Sam, who had met my family once during Parents' Weekend and had been appalled by their condescending treatment of me, nodded supportively. "You need to do this, Maya, for your own self-respect." We spent the next hour role-playing different scenarios, how I would respond if my father threatened me, what I would say if Stella accused me of ruining her wedding, how to handle my mother's inevitable tears. "Remember to breathe," Lena advised, her voice calm. Back in my dorm room, Chloe helped me prepare mentally for the confrontation. "Visualize yourself standing strong," she suggested, drawing on her psychology training. We practiced breathing exercises to manage anxiety and discussed boundary-setting techniques. Chloe, who had witnessed firsthand the toll my family's dismissal had taken on me, was fiercely supportive of my decision to finally stand up for myself. The next day, I went shopping for what would become the most important outfit of my life. I needed something appropriate for both my graduation ceremony and Stella's wedding, something that would make me feel powerful and confident. I finally selected a tailored, deep sapphire blue dress that was formal enough for both occasions without being flashy. It was professional, elegant, and distinctly me, not something chosen to fade into the background. The night before graduation, I lay awake in my dorm room, doubt creeping in despite all my meticulous preparation. Was I making a mistake? Would this forever damage my relationship with my family? Was I being selfish by potentially disrupting Stella's wedding weekend, her perfect day? Tears soaked my pillow as I wrestled with these agonizing questions. Part of me, the little girl who had stood alone at the robotics competition clutching her blue ribbon, still desperately yearned for her parents' approval. That part wanted to retreat, to apologize, to make myself small again for the sake of a false family peace. But by morning, as I stood before the mirror in my graduation cap and gown, I saw something different reflected back at me. I saw a young woman who had overcome not just dyslexia, but years of systematic dismissal to achieve extraordinary academic excellence. I saw someone worthy of recognition, respect, and celebration. "My name is Maya Sterling," I said to my reflection, rehearsing the opening of my valedictorian speech, my voice clear and resonant. It was time to show my family the truth. Graduation day dawned clear and bright, as if the universe itself approved of my decision. The ceremony was held in the university's grand amphitheater, with rows of folding chairs filling the space where, 4 years earlier, I had attended my first college lecture, uncertain and afraid. Now, as I took my place among the other graduates, I felt a potent mixture of pride and profound sadness. Pride in what I had accomplished, sadness that the seats I had reserved for my family would remain painfully empty. They didn't even know I was graduating today, let alone as valedictorian. When my name was called to approach the podium for my speech, the applause felt distant, as if happening in another room. I took a deep, fortifying breath, adjusted the microphone, and began. 4 years ago, I arrived at this university believing what I had been told about myself, that I was someone with limited potential, someone who would need to work twice as hard to achieve half as much as others. As I continued my speech about perseverance, authenticity, and self-belief, I scanned the audience, a fleeting, desperate hope clinging to my heart, momentarily hoping to see my parents' faces despite knowing they weren't there. Instead, I saw Professor Thorne beaming proudly, Lena giving me a heartfelt thumbs up, and dozens of classmates who had come to respect me for my work and character, not for my relationship to a perfect sibling. The diploma I received today represents more than academic achievement, I concluded, my voice resonating with newfound power. It represents the discovery of my own voice and the courage to use it. Whatever challenges you face beyond these walls, remember that you have the right to define yourself, regardless of others' expectations. The applause as I left the stage felt like a powerful validation, not just of my words, but of my decision to finally stand in my truth. After the ceremony, I didn't linger for photographs or celebrations. I changed in a campus bathroom, carefully placing my graduation cap and honors cords in my car before driving directly to the wedding venue. According to the meticulous schedule Stella had distributed, the ceremony would begin in 2 hours, with family photos happening now. I arrived, still wearing my sapphire blue dress from graduation, my diploma and portfolio of achievements tucked securely under my arm. The elegant country club was bustling with wedding staff, photographers, and early guests. I spotted my family gathered on the manicured lawn for pictures, Stella resplendent in her designer gown, my parents beaming beside her like proud statues. When they saw me approaching, my father's expression darkened instantly. "Maya, you're late," he hissed, his voice a low growl. "And what are you wearing?" "I need to speak with you," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, my gaze fixed directly on him. "Privately." "Now is not the time," he replied dismissively, waving a hand. "The photographer is waiting." "Richard?" my mother interjected, her eyes wide with a flicker of concern as she noticed my unusual demeanor. Reluctantly, my father followed me to a small, secluded sitting room off the main hall. My mother trailed behind, genuine concern etched on her face. To my surprise, Stella followed as well, her wedding gown rustling like angry whispers as she walked. "This better be important," she snapped, crossing her arms, her perfect composure beginning to fray. Once the door closed behind us, I placed my diploma deliberately on the antique coffee table. "I graduated today," I said simply, my voice unwavering. My father stared at the diploma, confusion slowly morphing into utter disbelief on his face. "Robotics engineering?" "No," I countered, my gaze unwavering. "I switched majors sophomore year." I opened my portfolio and spread out the undeniable evidence of my academic career: Dean's List certificates, research publications, prestigious academic awards, and finally my job offer. I've accepted a position at Quantum Innovations starting next month. I placed the offer letter on top of the pile, a symbol of my freedom. The room fell into a stunned, icy silence as my family processed this onslaught of information. My father's face flushed a deep, angry red, not with pride, but with raw fury. He demanded, his voice thick with accusation. "No," I replied, my voice steady, my conviction absolute. I simply stopped sharing the truth with people who weren't interested in hearing it. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and perhaps a hint of shame. "But because every time I tried, you changed the subject to Stella," I explained, the words flowing freely now, years of suppressed pain finding their voice. "Because Dad made it clear from childhood that he didn't believe I was capable of academic success." Stella, still in her wedding gown, looked genuinely shocked, a rare crack in her perfect facade. "Maya, I had no idea." I turned to my parents, my voice ringing with indignation. My father, recovering from his initial shock, switched to a defensive, almost sneering tone. "We were protecting you," I declared, my voice firm and clear. "I needed support, recognition," my father snapped, his face contorted in anger. "You've been deliberately deceiving us, and now you choose your sister's wedding day for this performance?" His words stung, a familiar poison, but I stood my ground, unyielding. "I chose today because you gave me an ultimatum: attend this wedding or lose my tuition. But the fact is, I don't need your tuition anymore." My father began, his voice rising, but my mother, surprisingly, placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Richard, stop." Stella, however, was building up to one of her trademark meltdowns. "I cannot believe you're doing this today of all days. This is my wedding, my special day, and you show up late not wearing your bridesmaid dress and start dropping bombs about your secret life?" The raised voices had attracted attention. The door opened slowly, and Reese, Stella's fiancé, peered in, his eyebrows raised as he took in the tense scene. He asked, his voice cautious. Stella cried, her voice escalating into a wail. Reese fully entered the room, his gaze falling on the documents spread across the table. He picked up one of my research publications, his eyebrows rising even further as he read the title. He asked me, sounding genuinely impressed, a note of awe in his voice. "I saw this presented at the AI Frontiers conference in Boston last fall." His unexpected support, his genuine admiration, momentarily silenced everyone in the room. Reese, who worked in tech venture capital, continued examining my credentials with growing respect, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Stella," he said gently, his voice surprisingly firm, "your sister isn't creating drama." He turned to me, his eyes questioning. "Because they never asked," I replied simply, my gaze sweeping over my family. "Because in this family, I've always been defined by what I'm not. Not as charismatic as Stella, not as socially adept, not as naturally gifted." Reese nodded thoughtfully, a flicker of understanding in his eyes, before addressing my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, I think you might want to reconsider how you're reacting right now." My father, unused to being challenged, bristled visibly. "This is a family matter, Reese." "I understand enough," Reese replied, surprising everyone, even Stella with his backbone. In the tense silence that followed, I gathered my documents and stood up, my resolve solidified. "I'm not here to ruin anything," I said, my voice carrying a quiet authority. "I'll attend the wedding as a guest, not a bridesmaid. I'll sit quietly and celebrate your marriage, Stella, but I won't pretend to be less than I am anymore." I looked each family member directly in the eye as I delivered my own final ultimatum. You can acknowledge who I really am and begin building a relationship based on truth, or you can continue believing what's comfortable for you. But I won't participate in my own erasure any longer. That's my choice. With those words, I walked out of the room, leaving my family to decide what happened next. The wedding proceeded despite the family drama, though not exactly as planned. I sat in the back row during the ceremony, watching as Stella and Reese exchanged vows. The bride looked beautiful, if slightly distracted, glancing my way several times during the service. At the reception, I found myself at a table with distant relatives who knew little about the family dynamics at play. To my surprise, several guests approached me throughout the evening, having somehow heard whispers about my academic achievements. "Your cousin mentioned you graduated as valedictorian today," my mother's cousin Barbara said, sitting down beside me, her eyes twinkling. "That's incredible, Maya. Tell me more about your research." These small, unexpected moments of genuine recognition from extended family members felt surreal after years of painful invisibility. The most unexpected support came from Aunt Clara, who sought me out during the cocktail hour and raised her champagne glass in a private toast. "To Maya," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears of pride. She nodded sadly. "I saw it, but I failed you by not speaking more forcefully. I thought it would change as you grew up, that they would eventually see you clearly." Her apology, the first I'd ever received from any family member, brought unexpected tears to my eyes, a surprising balm to old wounds. As the evening progressed, I maintained a respectful but firm distance from my immediate family. My father avoided me entirely, disappearing to the bar whenever I came into view. My mother made several awkward attempts at conversation, clearly struggling to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the accomplished young woman standing before her. It wasn't until late in the reception, after several drinks had loosened his rigid demeanor, that my father approached me on the terrace, where I had gone for a moment of quiet reflection. "Maya," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, almost fragile. "I waited silently, unwilling to make this easy for him. I may have misjudged some things," he continued, the words clearly difficult for him to utter. "Your mother and I." "But you did," I replied quietly, my voice devoid of anger, just stating the painful truth. He looked away, uncomfortable with the raw directness of my words. "We're proud of what you've accomplished." "I tried, Dad, many times." He had no response to that simple, undeniable truth, and after an awkward silence, he retreated back to the reception. It wasn't the tearful reconciliation scene from a movie, but it was a beginning, a tiny, fragile crack in the impenetrable wall of misunderstanding that had separated us for so long. My mother found me later, as the reception was winding down. Unlike my father, she made a more genuine, heartfelt attempt at reconciliation. "I failed you," she said simply, tears welling in her eyes, blurring her mascara. "I saw what was happening, how differently we treated you and Stella. But I didn't have the courage to challenge it. I told myself it was just your different personalities, your different needs." Her honesty, her raw vulnerability, touched me in a way my father's halting, almost apology hadn't. "Thank you for saying that, Mom," she asked, her voice pleading. I nodded cautiously. "I'd like that, but it will take time." "They will," she promised, her gaze earnest. Stella's reaction evolved throughout the evening. Her initial anger gave way to a complicated mix of emotions: resentment at having her perfect day disrupted, confusion about the sister she thought she knew, and eventually a reluctant, grudging respect for what I had achieved. Just before leaving with Reese for their honeymoon suite, she pulled me aside. "I still think you could have picked a better time to drop your bombshell," she said, her voice still edged with annoyance, but something else too, something new. "But what you've done, it's impressive, Maya." "That's the problem, Stella," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. She looked genuinely taken aback by my directness, her facade crumbling for a brief moment. "I guess I deserved that. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for how I've treated you and for what I said about you to Reese." It wasn't a complete transformation, not a Hollywood ending, but it was something. A recognition, however small, that she had contributed to the toxic family dynamic that had caused me so much pain. In the weeks following the wedding, I began the profound process of rebuilding my life on my own terms. I moved into my new apartment with help from Lena and Sam, not my family. The small studio became my sanctuary, the first space that was truly mine, decorated to reflect my personality rather than to meet someone else's expectations. My first day at Quantum Innovations marked another monumental milestone in my journey toward independence. Walking into the sleek, modern office building as a valued team member, not the family disappointment, felt like stepping into a new dimension, a world where my abilities were recognized and appreciated. "Welcome to the team, Maya," my new manager said during our first meeting, a genuine smile on his face. Simple words, but they resonated deeply, vibrating through my very core after years of having my potential questioned and dismissed. My relationship with my family entered a new, tentative phase, characterized by limited contact and carefully maintained boundaries. I declined Sunday dinners for the first month, giving myself crucial space to establish my new life without their overwhelming influence. When I finally did agree to visit, it was on my terms, bringing Lena as moral support and leaving when I felt my boundaries being tested. My father struggled the most with our new dynamic. Having lost his financial leverage over me, he seemed unsure how to relate to me as an independent adult, with her own formidable accomplishments. Our conversations remained stilted, often punctuated by awkward silences, but there were moments when I caught him looking at me with what appeared to be genuine curiosity about who I had become. My mother made more consistent, heartfelt efforts, calling regularly and asking thoughtful questions about my work and interests. She even visited my apartment, admiring the space I had created for myself and bringing a housewarming gift that showed she had actually been paying attention to my preferences. "I've been reading about advanced AI and learning differences," she told me during one visit, her voice soft with regret. "Trying to understand more about what you've been dealing with all these years." It was a small thing, a gesture that meant the world. Perhaps the most surprising development was my continuing friendship with Reese. Despite the lingering family tension, he reached out to discuss my research, eventually connecting me with venture capitalists interested in developing applications based on my disaster response algorithm. "Stella's coming around," he confided during one of our coffee meetings, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "She talks about you differently now, with respect." I couldn't help but ask, a flicker of hope in my chest. Reese smiled wryly. "Still processing, but he bragged about you to his golf buddies last week." As I settled into my new reality, I found myself thinking often about the other invisible students I had encountered during my college years, those struggling silently with the crushing weight of others' limited perceptions. This led me to volunteer as a mentor for first-generation college students with learning differences, sharing my experience and the practical strategies that had helped me succeed. During one mentoring session, I met Abigail, a freshman with dyslexia whose parents, like mine, didn't believe she could possibly succeed in STEM fields. "Everyone says I should switch to something easier," she confided, her eyes downcast, echoing my own past struggles with haunting precision. "The most important thing I learned," I told her, looking directly into her eyes, my voice filled with conviction, "is that your worth isn't determined by others' ability to see it." As I spoke, I realized I was finally living the advice I was giving. I had meticulously built my self-worth from within, brick by painstaking brick, no longer dependent on my family's fleeting approval or recognition. The journey wasn't over. There would be more difficult conversations, more boundaries to establish, more old patterns to break. But for the very first time, I was moving forward as my authentic self, neither diminished by others' perceptions nor defined by their suffocating limitations. And that, more than any academic honor or professional achievement, was the true, profound victory. Hey everyone, if you've stuck with me through this story, thank you. Thank you for listening. My journey might sound dramatic, but the core feeling, the feeling of being underestimated, overlooked, or told you're not enough, That's universal. For so long, I let my family's narrative define me. I shrank myself to fit into their tiny box, believing that peace meant silencing my own truth. But real peace, true freedom, came only when I decided to bravely, unapologetically, be myself. Here's what I truly want you to take away from my story. Your worth is intrinsic. It doesn't come from external validation, family approval, or anyone else's perception of you. You are valuable just as you are, with all your unique strengths and challenges. Don't hide your light. If you're pursuing something you're passionate about, even if it feels like a secret, nourish that fire. One day, it will be powerful enough to illuminate your path forward regardless of who sees it. Boundaries are essential. Learning to set clear, healthy boundaries with family, friends, or anyone who diminishes you is not selfish. It's an act of self-preservation. It allows you to protect your energy and mental well-being. Seek your tribe. Find people who see you, truly see you, for who you are. My Professor Thorne, Lena, and Sam were my anchors. These are the people who will champion you, celebrate your quiet victories, and remind you of your strength when you forget. It's okay to rewrite your story. You are not bound by the roles others assign you. You have the power to define yourself, your capabilities, and your future. It takes immense courage, but it is the most liberating thing you will ever do. So, if you're out there feeling unseen, if you're holding back your true potential because of someone else's limitations, please know this. You deserve to be recognized. You deserve to be celebrated. Find that quiet determination inside you, that grit, and take one brave step forward. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when no one believed in you? How did you find the courage to show your true abilities? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you handled similar family dynamics or moments when you had to choose between peace and authenticity. Don't forget to like this video if Maya's journey resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of personal triumph, and share with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be seen for who they truly are. Thank you for listening to my story.